everybody. Welcome, welcome. I hope you all are doing great today. All right, for those who don't know me, my name is Bridget, and I am a filmmaker and animator in New York City. And I am just so happy that you all have taken some time out of your day these last few weeks to make some art with me. It's been very fun. And yeah, I hope you're getting some great stuff out of this class. So just to review, these last 2 weeks, we have been learning everything about the stop motion animation process. So the first day, we learned the basics of stop motion animation, and we also learned how to create our own setup at home using materials from our house. And last week, we learned how to create a story, and we learned a lot of, I think, good tools and techniques to how to write stories with your students or with your kids. Sorry, I'm used to talking to teachers. I always say your students, but they're your kids. And so hopefully you all have spent this last week writing some really amazing stories. I'm so excited to hear about them. And today we're kind of taking it to the next step. So today we're going to learn all about how to do the making. So we're going to learn how to make our sets and our props and our characters. And we're going to also learn how to make those things with animation in mind, right? So how do we make a character that can move to accomplish whatever goal is in our scene, right? And so today we're going to watch a little film with some really lovely sets and props. And then we'll just kind of break it down and talk about what that filmmaker used. And then I made a few puppets of my own that I'll show you all. And then and we'll kind of talk about why I made them the way I made them. And then I'm actually going to do 2 animations with you to show you how to animate these puppets. And that'll be it. So that's very exciting. Sorry, I'm a little lost in my thoughts. Okay, so the screening we are going to watch is a really, really beautiful film. It was made by a woman named Emily Hoffman. And I chose this film because she uses everything that she uses, she's made out of paper. And that's the material we're going to work with today. You can use other materials, and we'll talk about all of that at the end of class, kind of brainstorm some other materials that you all can use. But I would definitely recommend starting with paper. And so while we're watching this film, I want everybody to be thinking about, how did she make this? How are the characters able to move the way they move? I just want you to really think about that making process. What did Emily do to, how did she cut her paper to make it look like the way she made it? Great. So Hara, I think we're ready for the film. Or Alex, can you play the film? Thank you.
I am who I am because of her. I come from the dull brown of my mother's eyes, watching over me while my eyes seek darkness. Her warmth throwing me back into reality. I come from the love of my mother's tight, long embrace. I am the answer for her pain that increases the lines etched upon her face. These lines that spill her sufferings out during her troubled, restless nights. One day, I will wipe away from her face the waterfall of hopelessness and replace it with the river of hope and salvation. One day, I will show the world I am that girl who shoots bullets into the sky and makes doorways of freedom, hope, and relief. Not only for my mother, but for all those out there who are in need.
Great. I love that film. It's very short, but I think that it's just beautiful. It was created, I think as a part of a series called Daughters of Destiny on Netflix, but this is the only part of that series that's animated. So I don't know too much about the rest of it, but that film is really lovely. Okay, so what I'm gonna do with you all now is I'm going to share my screen and I have a PowerPoint with a few stills from the film we just watched. And I'm going to use it as an example of how to make our puppets. Okay, great. So, so this is one of the first kind of opening scenes, right, where we are, the mother and the daughter are hugging each other, right? They embrace each other. And so before we dissect this, I want everybody to think about what part of your body moves when you hug somebody, especially maybe when you hug somebody shorter than you, right? What parts of your body moves? Probably your back. Maybe every kind of segment of your arms would move. Your head might tilt a little bit, right? So kind of break it down that way. A lot of professional animators actually film themselves doing certain things and then they'll watch it back before they animate, which could be a fun thing to do. So let's see, let's take kind of a closer look at this and see how Emily accomplished this hug. So what I noticed is that a lot of separate pieces of paper were used, right? Her hand is a different piece of paper than her forearm, which is different than her upper arm. I noticed that her back is separated into two different pieces of paper. I noticed that she has two little wisps of hair that are separate. And so when we think about the animating process, all of these pieces have to be separate so that they can move, right? So what Emily did is she thought about, like we just did, what needs to move in order to create the illusion of a hug, right? And then she broke that down in this character, this puppet that she made. Okay, so let's look at the next example. So now we have a face. And what I love about this face, if you'll notice, if this was a scene where this woman was talking, then her lips would have to be moving, right? If this was a scene where she was making a funny face, probably her cheeks would have to move as well. But instead, this scene is just her crying. She just closes her eyes and tears come down. And so if you'll notice, we have these eyelids are a separate piece of paper. And then she has these wisps of hair that are separate. And that's it. And it's so effective because she closes her eyes while the wind, I think, is kind of moving her hair. Then tears come down. The next thing I want us to think about is see how big her face is. It takes up the whole frame, right? And then compare that to these puppets where we don't even see the features of the face. So if we're imagining that the setup is the same, right? The camera is the same distance from the plane that they're animating on. We can imagine that these puppets are maybe as big as your face. And then this puppet also is as big as your face, but it's way more zoomed in. So the face is as big as their full bodies, right? And so think about that when you're creating your puppets and go big. It's way easier to create a puppet, especially with kids, when you do it on a larger scale, when you have more material to work with. So it's okay if the face is pretty big. You just have to, of course, move your camera a little bit further away. But it seems like that's what Emily did. Okay, there's one more scene I want us to look closely at. This scene. So I'm not sure if you remember this part, but this is when the bullets go up into the air and then something like shoots out of them, I think stars or something. And so I want us to think for a second about how did we animate these bullets moving up into the sky? I'm gonna let you think for a second. So the bullets actually never moved, right? It's not like they had a camera and then they tracked the bullets. You know, every time they took a picture, they moved the camera with the bullets. Of course, that didn't happen. Instead, the bullets stayed still, but the clouds moved, right? The clouds moved down to create the illusion of movement. We're gonna do something today that does a similar thing. Um, and then I want us to look at one more thing. So these bullets, that's just one piece of paper. All these stars and these little things, I don't know what those are. Those are all just one piece of paper. And so again, you can create this really effective movement with just one piece of paper. The thing is, you had to think about it beforehand, right? If these bullets needed to bend, if one part of it needed to pop off, then they would need to be separate pieces of paper. But Emily knew that in this scene, they're just moving upwards and then they're going to transform into something else. So they just need to be one piece of paper. And so that's all she did, right? Before we move on, I want to define 3 terms for us all so that we're all on the same page. The first term is set. What I mean by set is the background that if it's moving, it's only small movements, right? It's not a character, it's not coming to life, it's the background. So for example, in this, the set are these little huts. I think I can see that these huts are kind of multiple pieces of paper. I think I remember them rustling a little bit in the wind, but for the most part, they're still. So you can make a really beautiful, complicated set like this, but you can also do this set, right? Or the bullet set, right? Where it's just clouds and a pretty piece of paper. That's still a set. I'll show you today. My set is pretty simple today. The next word I want to think about is props. A prop is anything that typically in theater, a prop is anything that an actor touches. If an actor picks up a cup, that cup is a prop. If the actor does not pick it up, it's a set piece. So in animation, it's a little different. In my mind, a prop in animation is something that really moves. It's an item, it maybe doesn't have a voice, it doesn't have a storyline, but it might move. So in my mind, these bushes are props. I don't think there's any props in the scene. Everything here is pretty much a prop, right? These bullets are props, these stars, these little leaves, they're all props. And the last thing I want to define is the word puppet. In animation, puppet is what we use to describe the character that we're animating. So these are 2 puppets. She is a puppet. That's just the word we use. I know it can be kind of confusing because when we think of puppets, we think of like Sesame Street puppets. But in animation, that's just what I'm going to be calling all of the characters that we're working with. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share. Hello again, everybody. So like I said, I have created, let me do a time check. We're good. So like I said, I have created my own puppets and sets and props to work with today. So I'm going to show you the puppets first, and then we're going to kind of work backwards or talk about my process backwards. So the first puppet I made is this fish. So this fish has a little mouth and it has a fin. So when we start animating, I'm going to animate this fish eating something. It's going to be something small. And that's it. I'm going to have him swimming around and then eat something. That was my decision. It's just going to be a very simple animation. So I want to break this down a little bit. I could I just made this fin separate. I could have made this fin separate, right? And have 2 flowing fins. I could have made this eye separate and the pupil separate so he could look around. I could have added an eyebrow or something to give him a little bit more expression. I could have done a lot more, but I decided to just make 2 separate parts. So a fish, a mouth, and a fin. If by any chance you right now would like to do this animation activity with me, you're completely welcome. I would love if you could make this fish. So just make a fish, a regular fish like this, and cut out the mouth. And then also draw a fin and cut it out. One other thing I want to point out is the way that I decided to make this. I just took a big piece of paper and I watercolored whatever I wanted on it, and then I drew it and cut it out. And it made this really nice texture. And I love doing this assignment with kids, especially with toddlers or students under 5. What I often do is I curate the colors. And so we have a big piece of paper and I say, all right, I want you to use the purple and make a swirl. I want you to use the blue and do a straight line. I want you to use the lighter blue and make a curvy line, and continue until the whole piece of paper is filled out. That way, you know, the colors are going to look really nice together. But no matter what, I think watercolor always looks really nice. And when you cut it out kind of outside of that context, it'll look kind of like a fish. So I recommend doing that or coming up with your own style, but I'm a big fan of just filling a piece of paper with color, however you want to do that, and then using that as your puppet. Great, so the second one I made is kind of like we talked about. I made a close-up of my fish. So this is my fish face. Very cute, I think. And then I made a lot of different expressions. So I made a smile. I think this is supposed to be a frown. When I have this little surprise. I also made eyebrows because I think it's really fun to animate with eyebrows. Not everybody does, but I love animating eyebrows. I mean, these cute little eyebrows. I don't think fish really have eyebrows, but I don't know. And then another thing I did was I made eyelids, and I want to make a special note with this. So I actually made 2. So the first one is like this. So it's kind of like a half closed eye, right? And so I'll show you when we're animating. Every time I animate a blink, I'm gonna take a picture like this, and then I'm gonna add this. So add the lower half and take another picture. And then I'm just going to take the lower half away, take a picture, and then the rest, right? So just one sequence of blinking ends up being like 4 pictures, I think. That'll be a little more clear when I start animating. So again, I could have made this fin and these fins separate so we could have wiggled more of his features. I could have made his eyeballs move so he could look left and right. Right? Again, I could have done more, but I just stuck to eyebrows and mouth movements. You can make those decisions when you're making your animations. I also just want to point out the size. So the full body, they're kind of similar sizes, right? So make sure to think about that. I know it's pretty tempting to make the face kind of like real life, how big the face would be proportionally to the body. But I recommend taking it up a size. All right, are we ready to animate together? So let me move all of this. My big recommendation when you have all of these little pieces, if you take a little piece of tape, like Scotch tape or masking tape, and for example, I would just tape a little donut of tape on the back of this, and then you just stick these guys on, and then they always stay together. I did not do that, but I regret it. I should have, because it's hard to keep track of. Okay, I'm gonna move these guys aside. So this is what I'm gonna use as my set today. It's just a purple piece of fabric, but I think it kind of has a nice texture to it. To be honest, I don't know where I got this. I just found it in my drawer. And it's fabric, which I sometimes think is really nice to work with because it's a little bit more malleable. You can decide whatever you'd like with your sets, but I encourage you to explore using fabric. So this is my set. This is my ocean background. It's going to be a purple ocean. And then I also have all of these cool shells that I'm going to use. I said all. I have 4 shells that I'm going to use. And then this is my prop. It's a button, and that's going to be my fish's meal. Okay. So I hope you all remember how to do our setup. So we have a stack of books here. I used a way bigger stack of books than last time because I made my puppets pretty big. But I think you'll see that it'll work out really well. This is my stack of cookbooks. Okay, here we are. And then I've got my rulers, right? And I can still see you all. So again, this is a really great example of making sure that your camera is open when you start setting up, because I want to make sure not only that I can see what's going on, but I also have noticed that sometimes I accidentally show my books, like a little bit of a corner of a book. And the only way to not do that is by kind of testing it out a little bit. So now I'm at a good spot. I don't see any of my books. And now I'm ready to put my set pieces down. So what I'm going to do, oh, you all can't see it. I'm going to move my camera down just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up kind of like the bullet scene. And I'm going to move my shells instead of moving my fish and my camera. And I am ready to go. I recommend taping, especially if your books aren't covering your set, I recommend taping your set down so it doesn't move between frames. For me, I was able to just stack my books directly on my fabric, so I know it's not going to move around. And I'm going to put my mouth right here. The mouth is not going to move until the button comes. But if, for example, I was moving my fish around a lot and I wanted the mouth to stay still, I would probably tape the mouth to the fish. But for this, I know that's not going to happen. I know that we're just moving the fin to make kind of the illusion of swimming, right? And then here is my fin. I think it goes that way. Okay, and now I'm ready to go. So this is really my set. It's super simple. I have these guys ready back here out of frame. I have my button ready. I'm going to start with just this shell here. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a picture. Make sure that your onion skin is on. And then I'm going to move my fin a little bit down. Going to move my shell. Ooh, my shell should be moving the other way, right? Okay. Going to move my shell. Going to move my fin. Take a picture. Going to enter the next shell. Move this shell. Move this fin. Take a picture. Move, 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 take a picture. We talked about a few techniques, right? Where we could say something like spaghetti every time we take a picture so that I know my fingers aren't going to be in it. We're going to move. I'm going to put this cute little piece of coral down next. Take a picture. Move these guys, move the fin, take a picture. And this is a really great part to, play around with speed. How big are your movements here? Move, move, take a picture. Move, move, take a picture. All right, and so now my button's gonna come in. I think it's gonna come in from the bottom. And I still have to remember to move my shell. Take a picture. So my button's going to move in. As it moves in, my character is going to open his mouth, like this coral is almost done. So this is another great time to have a lot of different animators. One animator can be in charge of moving the shells. One animator is in charge of moving the fins. One animator is in charge of moving the button, right? And so now the button is this close, so I'm going to open my mouth or start to open it. Going to open it a little bit more, move the button inside a little bit more. Don't forget to move your fin. Move the button more, move the fin. And now my mouth is going to start closing. Ooh. And right now I'm just going to put the mouth over the button. Another option would just be to take the button away. All right, and that's that. So let's watch it back. So I think it looks like he's swimming. You know, if I was doing this on my own without an audience and a class and a time frame, I'd probably be a little bit more careful with the animation. I'd make sure things were a little bit more in frame. I think I would move the shells a little slower. That would be my note. But other than that, you know, he ate the button. That's what I wanted to happen, right? And that whole video was about 20 frames long. So if we remember, it's almost 2 seconds, a little less than 2 seconds. So great, so I'm gonna add another project. And we're gonna do the same thing, but this time we are going to animate the face. And here's what I wanna do with the face. I want him to change facial expression. So he's gonna be smiling, and then he's gonna be frowning, and then he'll be surprised. That's my idea. So this time it's gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna start with his eyes closed, is my thought. We'll put his little eyebrows here. And, you know, I wanna make sure that he's in frame. Looks pretty good. And then with all of these shells that I have, I'm actually just gonna kind of decorate them, and they're not gonna move this time. I think we could think about a way to make them move so that it looks like he's swimming forward or backward. But I kind of think in this scene, he's just staying still. He's just swimming in place. But you could add some movement. Maybe if you have bubbles or something, you could add some bubbles moving around, make it look a little more oceany. But for me, we're just gonna leave it here. Again, I have these, all of my props are right here out of frame, but easy to access. Highly recommend that. And we're just gonna get going. So we're gonna take a picture like this. I'm actually gonna take a couple pictures because I think it's nice to have a few pictures just at the beginning. And then he's gonna open his eyes. So if we remember, we're first gonna take these bottom ones away. So he's kind of half open. And then we're gonna take the top ones away. And then I think I'm gonna have him raise his eyebrows and smile. So if you remember when we did, I think we did growth animation, we replaced, right, a small triangle with a bigger triangle with a bigger triangle. We're gonna do a similar thing, right? You don't see the in-betweens of the face. It's just a smile and a frown. And I'm gonna show you that it will work. At 12 frames per second, our brain, our eyes will fill in the spaces. So I'll show you when I'm finished, but I don't need the in-betweens. If I just quickly change its space and transform it, our brain will fill in all of the in-betweens, and it'll look like it's going from smiling to frowning. So I'll show you. So he's really happy right now, right? And now I'm gonna make him frown. So I'm gonna start with the eyebrows are gonna move down, a little further down, And I'm gonna have him blink too, because I think that that's a good way to show that a change is about to happen. Still move his eyebrows all the way down. And then he's gonna open. And now he's gonna be all the way open and he's gonna be frowning. And so remember, this is a great place for your onion skin. I'm making sure that the frown is in the same place that the smile was in. All right, and now we're gonna go to surprise. Maybe he was sad and then surprised, I don't know. So I'm gonna move the eyebrows up a little bit. And let's have him blink again. So again, I think everybody kind of gets into the zone when they're animating, but especially kids really get into the rhythm of it, which I think is really great. Okay, so now his eyes are open and he's gonna be surprised. Woo! And then let's go back to smiling. So his eyebrows are gonna kind of go back to normal, right? He's not as surprised anymore, he's just happy. And let's have him blink one more time. Woo! And here we are, a big smile. All right, and now I'm gonna have him close his eyes and that will be the end of the video. And you know what we could do? I'm gonna turn my frown upside down and now it's just a little small smile. And that's how he's gonna sleep, with a small smile on his face. All right, should we look at it? And I want you to pay attention when we're watching this. See, do I need the in-betweens of the facial expressions or does it work? Here we go. Whoops, sorry, it's upside down. I'm gonna try to show it to you kind of like this. So I think my one mistake on this was I should have, when he landed on an expression, I should have taken a few more pictures so that it was still for a while. And I think maybe he blinks a little too much. But other than that, I think you kind of get it, right? He's frowning, he's surprised, he's smiling. So again, this is, of course, a place that you can explore and see what works best for you. I'm gonna move all of this crazy stuff out of the way. But the face especially is a really great way to explore because it doesn't take very much energy, right? I could reanimate that again. That whole animation process only took a few minutes. I could do it again. And this time, make sure that his eyes are closing and opening a little bit slower, maybe, is what I was missing. But that whole film, let me see. That one was 34 frames, so just about 3 seconds. And again, we kind of talked about a few other things that you could do. You could have had more movement in the kind of ocean, right? If you had bubbles or something. But overall, I think I could cut together a pretty effective movie from his facial expressions changing and then him eating a button. It'd be pretty easy. So when you are going into this next step of creating your puppets and sets and props, I really want you to do it with your storyboard and your story right next to you. Really think about what movements does my character need to make to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished in that scene, and then make your puppets accordingly. Your handout this week actually kind of does some of that work for you. So you'll see it. It's basically a graphic organizer. And so on one part, you have the scene, and you can, write a little description about what that scene is. And then you have what props, what sets, and what puppets do you need for each scene. So you need to go through your film scene by scene and decide that. If we go back to Emily's animation, Daughters of Destiny, I think that's what it's called. Think about what she did. So that first scene with them hugging, she probably wrote hugging scene. And then she wrote, I need two characters, the mother and daughter. They need to be able to hug each other. I need the background with the houses. I need some trees and some bushes that can move. That's her scene. Those are the things she created. And then she was able to animate it. We talked a little bit last class about the importance of being thoughtful at this stage. This is another example of it, right? The more you think through your puppets and your sets and your props, the easier it's going to be come animation time. So I'm really excited for you. I encourage you to make everything that you possibly can this week. Try to make all of your puppets and props and sets, and try to animate it if you can. Next week, we're going to talk about the very last step in the process, which is finalizing your films. I'm going to show you how to edit. I'm going to show you how to add audio, how to add dialogue, really just how to put it all together and get ready to show it to your friends and family. So if you have some footage to work with, that would be really helpful. So if you want to start animating this week, that'd be great. If not, hopefully you'll learn everything you need to learn when you get to that stage. Okay. Whew, so that was a lot today. We did 2 animation activities and we made puppets. So I'm going to review a little bit of what we learned today, and then I'll open the floor to questions. And I have some FAQs, frequently asked questions of my own, that I can share with you. So today we defined the words sets, props, and puppets. We learned how to make a puppet with movement in mind. We learned a few tricks for how to animate with the paper puppets that you make. And we learned about the size, right? The proportions that you need to make your characters in. And then we reviewed our assignment so that you all can start making everything that you need to create your film. Great. So I think I'm ready to open the floor for questions. Oh, we're a little early. That's good. One other thing that I do want to review before we jump into questions that we did not talk about is why I chose to use paper. So kind of like we talked about in the first class, if your kid is really excited about animating with a toy or a Lego, go for it. There's nothing wrong with animating with those things. They can end up looking really cool. But I would recommend you really thinking through that process and thinking, okay, how does this stuffed animal move? We want your main character to be fighting evil. Is your stuffed animal going to be able to do that? Is it going to be able to move in that way? If not, maybe let's use that character for something else, right? Or use that toy as a prop. So I recommend kind of having those conversations and figuring out exactly what is needed for the vision of the film for the scene. That being said, I think that with paper, you can actually really accomplish a lot. And it can look really pretty, as we saw with the Daughters of Destiny film. And so I really like starting out with paper. For my beginning animators, I love, let's make paper puppets, paper props, paper everything. And then in the next film, we kind of advance to other kinds of materials, or to 3D kind of upright materials. But I do like to start with paper. That being said, I like to use different kinds of paper. You know, something a little hardy like cardstock is really important so that the character doesn't bend too much. For example, my fish, I actually didn't use cardstock, and you can see that it's kind of warped, and it makes it more difficult to animate with, right? Because it was just staying still on my desk, it didn't matter that much. But you know, if I was trying to move it or if I was trying to do something with it, it would be really frustrating. So maybe use cardstock, learn from my mistakes. But yeah, so I recommend starting with paper, or at least using paper for something, right? So maybe most of your movie is with Legos, but your main character is with paper. I would recommend that. Okay, so that was my spiel about paper animating. Now we can open up to questions. So if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A box or in the chat box, whichever you would like. And if there aren't any questions right off the bat, I can dive into some frequently asked questions that I get. I'm going to take a sip of coffee first. Okay, so something that we didn't really go over, but people ask a lot, is kind of what materials are ideal for creating a set. So we talked about paper. Nothing bad with that. I recommend, you know, a set doesn't really move, so I think you can get a lot more experimental with your materials for a set. So the first thing is like layering paper. Big fan of, you know, if your movie takes place during the daytime on a sunny day, use a blue piece of paper as your start, and then cut out, kind of collage other colors of paper as your houses, as your grassy hill, as your whatever. But layering, kind of collaging paper together makes a really colorful set. You can use collage materials like magazines. That can work really well too. You can also use, you know, big physical objects like my shells. You can glue them down so that they don't move, or you can just place them and make sure you don't move them. But get a little funky with it. You know, you can use string, you can use dirt, you can use leaves, you can use anything that you find outside or around your house. This is a really great place to use toys, things like that, that your kids really want to use. So, you know, with your set, you can get pretty creative. If you do decide to have a 3D film, what I mean by 3D is upshoot, right? Everything that we've been doing has been downshoot. So we're looking down at our paper, our animation moving around. If you decide to do upshoot, you want your characters to be standing and walking around. That set can be a few different things. So very simply, it can be, you know, you have your stack of books, right? And then you could have your piece of paper or your fabric, kind of like this, right? And so my character is here, my camera is maybe here, and then it's just moving around. Very simple. So that's one option. Another option is to, sorry, camera's a little funky today. Another option is to use a piece of cardboard and kind of stick two pieces of cardboard together and then create the scene in the cardboard, you know, make little beds, make some wallpaper, make a window, and use this background and the foreground for whatever scene that you want. Another thing you should keep in mind though is space in your house, right? If you're gonna have a bunch of 3D sets all around because you have 8 scenes and they all require a different big 3D set, that's gonna be pretty difficult to find space for. So, you know, thinking through those things and saying, oh, maybe we should do, maybe our first film should be all downshoot. And our next film can be 3D. Are there any questions? So with that in mind, if you are planning on eventually making a 3D or an upshoot film, your puppets, you can do a lot with them. We talked a little bit about toys, but I would recommend getting some wire. Any wire is fine, as long as the gauge is pretty small. And just using it to the best of your ability, kind of using it as the skeleton, and then build your character on top of that frame, so that you can bend it and move the arms and do whatever you want with it. I also recommend using a clay called plasticine. If you're not familiar, that's a clay that's oil-based so that it doesn't dry, because obviously you don't want your clay to be drying as you're trying to animate it. And so that's another thing you could do. You could do wire and just put plasticine around it, and that can be your puppet. Yeah, so make it your own. We didn't really have the capacity to talk about 3D puppets. That could be a whole other lesson, would be how to create 3D puppets. But I think you can do a lot with 2D stuff. And then if you want to add some 3D stuff, I recommend wire and plasticine. Yeah, but it's another thing to explore. Also, looking up any tutorials online for how to create those puppets is really useful. Okay. Just having to look through all of my questions. Are there any other questions from you all? I don't think so, not yet. So another question that I got last class, or with a different group when we did this class, was about the film itself. Somebody noticed that, or the film that we watched, the Daughters of Destiny film, somebody noticed that if you look at the scene where they're embracing, the very background is out of focus. And then it kind of gets more in focus until the two women are hugging each other. And so she asked how that was accomplished. And that was a really great question. And it's another thing that we don't really have the capacity to go over, but I can briefly explain it. So Emily used a technique called multi-planes. And that's just what it sounds like. It's multiple planes. And it was a kind of animation. I think it was invented by Disney, but it was probably invented before Disney, and Disney just took credit for it. But it is a way of animating multiple layers to create depth. So if we have our film facing down, like we talked about, the ground would be kind of the first plane. And then she had some sort of stack of something. I've used cups. I've actually used Legos before as a stack. And then she put plexiglass on top of it. I've used like picture frames, just, kind of clear glass. Plexiglass is nice because it doesn't break as much. You can use whatever you want, just something clear. And then she did another one. I think she probably had 3 or 4 planes. So you do another Lego, another block, right? And then put another piece of plexiglass on top, and then just keep going however high you want. So on the bottom here, she probably had the sky and a few houses, and then up above she had a few more houses, and then up above some trees, and then on the top layer was the women embracing. And so it's a really great technique to do because you could animate down here and up here separately, but it also creates, like we said, a nice depth. So you can really see into, her little town. You can see into the ocean if that's what you were doing. I recommend exploring it if you have an empty picture frame around, or if you have some plexiglass by any chance, you can totally just try even one multiplane. So for me, I would have, maybe my fabric would be on the bottom, and then I'd have my little stack, and then my picture frame. And down here, I would be animating bubbles, and I would be animating my shells moving. And then up here, I'd be animating my fish. So the shells would look they would be out of focus. So it would look like they were in the background. But also I can move the shells without disturbing the fish, which would also be nice as far as like the animating process. And so, yeah, I recommend it. I also would totally look up Bambi as the first. They say that that's the first place where multiplanes were used. And so looking at some kind of concept design or YouTube videos of how they created Bambi. And it's really incredible. They had this huge multiplane machine that they would crank. And so each plane would move up. So it looked like you were going through the forest. It's very cool. Highly recommend looking it up. I don't think that's how, or I know that that's not how they do films like that anymore. But it's really cool to look up. So now we do a very modified version of that. But yeah, explore multiplanes, explore depth. It's a great thing to do. Or even just rewatch Daughters of Destiny, knowing that they use multiplanes, and see if that kind of changes your perspective of how that film looks. I need to drink more coffee. It's a little bit earlier today in New York because we had a daylight saving time, our time changed. So it's a little earlier than usual for me. All right, does anybody have any other questions? I have a couple more frequently asked questions, but I want to make sure I get all of yours first. Go ahead and throw it in the Q&A box if you do, or the chat box. All right, the next topic I want to discuss, and I know we're going to have to discuss this every week, is dialogue. So one of the hardest things to do in stop motion animation is syncing the lips with dialogue, right? And you can, I always recommend watching Wallace and Gromit tutorials because they have a lot. BBC really covered behind the scenes for them. But I recommend it for this because they kind of go over the process. But even as I'm talking, you see how many different shapes my mouth makes when I talk, right? And so if you are very advanced in your animation skills, you would look at each mouth shape and match it to the dialogue. And instead of having, just a smile and a frown, you would create each mouth shape and you would move them according to what the dialogue is. That is a great thing to learn how to do. But again, maybe save that for when your skills are a little bit more honed, because if you do it right off the bat, you might not be successful. And we want to, of course, set our kids up for success. So definitely look at it. There's nothing wrong with looking it up and seeing how to do it really well. But again, I don't think you necessarily need dialogue in your first film. You can just have some narration and some sound effects. But if you really, really want dialogue, if your kid is like really, really pushing it, really wants your character to speak, I would recommend just doing 2 mouth shapes, doing kind of an open one. This isn't a good example, but kind of an open and a closed. It's not perfect, but it would totally work. And just remember that each frame is 1/12 of a second, right? And so I would recommend doing a couple pictures with the mouth open and a couple pictures with the mouth closed. And also remembering that oftentimes animating takes so long. And so as we're animating, we think, oh, I must have already animated 5 minutes of film. And then you look back and it's only 1 second, right? And so if you are doing dialogue and mouth movement, do a lot. Do way more than you think you need to, because then in the editing process, it's a lot easier to take it away. So yeah, so it's possible. I would, recommend using it lightly, maybe not doing it too much, but it's totally possible to have a little bit of mouth movement, especially on your close-up, right? If you have your close-up fish, it'd be so easy to make this guy talk a little bit. Easy peasy. I'll show you next week a few techniques, but you can also record your dialogue first and then animate, which makes it, so you're kind of animating on top of the sound, so you can kind of listen back as you're animating. And so that's a really good technique to do. But then the other thing you could do is you could animate it and then watch it back as you record the dialogue, so you can kind of match the dialogue to the animation. So you have a few options. So again, my recommendation is your first film is maybe no dialogue, and then your next film has dialogue. But if you want to jump the gun and do it, just make it as simple as possible. But it's definitely something that you can do. All right, are there any questions from you all? So another thing that you can do in the same vein of, we have a close-up of the face. You can also do a close-up of other body parts. So something I've done in a film recently is I had a character looking in a box and grabbing a rock. So I had one shot of the character looking in the box, right? But then my other shot was a close-up of a hand. So I made a hand, as big as the face would be, right? So it was a very big hand. And I made each of his little finger segments separate. And then I animated a hand grabbing a rock. And so then I kind of flipped back and forth between his full body looking and then the hand grabbing. And it was really effective. And so again, it's a time that you look at your script and see what you need, but it's a great way to kind of fill time, is by doing a zoomed in view of whatever action they're doing. So maybe they're grabbing a wand, and then maybe you also animate just the wand and sparks coming out of the wand, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but kind of think about it in that close up, far away, zoomed out, close up, perspective changing. So when you're looking at your script, find moments where you can do that. And so maybe you need a small wand for when you have the full body character with the wand, and then you also can make a big wand and animate sparks flying out of it, or whatever your wand might be doing. All right, we just have a few more minutes left, so great time to ask any of your last minute questions. Next week, when we learn about editing and adding dialogue, I'm going to go ahead and edit together the two films that I made today, right? We made the close-up and we made the fish eating a button. So I'm going to edit those together and add my own dialogue and my own sound effects and music. And then we're going to work backwards from there. So yeah, so look forward to that. It's going to be really great. You're going to learn pretty much everything you need to learn about editing, and we can do it all from the software that you already have downloaded. So it'll be a very useful class. So I hope y'all can come. All right, we can wait one more minute in case there are any last minute questions. Questions about your puppets, how to make a set. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. And I can't wait to see you next week for our final class. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Hara.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks.